Hello, all. Thanks for joining wherever you're joining in from. My name's Josh. I am the head of growth here at Graphite, joining in from Brooklyn, New York. Finally getting a little chilly over here, hence the sweater weather. But really excited to have you all here, and more excited that we're hosting this with David Rowat, one of our partners over at Strategic Exits. He'll be our keynote speaker today. And leading the ever important topic for founders of how to maximize the selling price of your technology company. The goal here is to be interactive and kind of just think through and discuss how founders can take control of their exits by being proactive about it, by creating an exit strategy and a plan that they can diligently execute over time. Before we dig in with David, I just wanted to give a high-level overview of Graphite and why we actually host these sessions. If you are unfamiliar with Graphite, I'll keep this brief, should only need a couple minutes here, but Graphite in a nutshell, why we exist. We're an accounting and finance and strategy firm who specifically focuses and supports early stage and growing startups, a lot of technology companies, a lot of direct to consumer, a lot of fintech, and just a lot of venture-backed startups. It's an interesting story how we started, which kind of bleeds into what we're talking about today. We were started within a venture fund, actually, called FFAC in New York. We started as just a value add service within the fund, but so many of the portfolio companies were requesting help on accounting and finance and financial modeling support and bookkeeping support, that eventually we were supporting so many of the portfolio companies that we broke off to support the greater startup ecosystem. That happened in 2016. We were about 4 people then. We're about 50 to 60 now, still a boutique in the space. And we act as the accounting department for many, many growing venture-backed startups. Kind of a high-level breakdown of our services. There's a lot of things we do for our companies. Biggest things are bookkeeping, acting as your controller, handling a lot of the nitty-gritty accounting, invoicing, receivables, accounts payable, full service, anything an in-house team can do, we can do. We're also heavy on the strategy side. We can act as your interim CFO, helping you build out your financial model, helping you through fundraising and getting through fundraising, presenting things to investors, etc. And then corporate tax, we handle all basic tax services for ongoing accounting clients. This is just an example of the typical tech stacks we like to implement. We are a tech-first accounting firm. The goal is to implement as much process and system and software that we can in order to prep you for scale, so you can scale efficiently over time and not run into any issues. These are just examples of some of the tools that we use. And then lastly, if you're not familiar with fractional accounting or fractional services in general, it tends to be much less expensive than hiring internally over time, hence why so many startups are using fractional accounting and bookkeeping and CFO services now compared to early on hiring internally. You're just going to save a lot of money, and it tends to be more efficient for startups. All that being said, we will send a follow-up after this, but if you're interested, take a screenshot of this, write down my email. Always happy to connect. My job is literally just to talk to founders all day, hear about what you're working on, see if there's a way for us to help you. All that being said, I will shut up now and I will pass it over to David, our keynote speaker, who is going to lead the discussion from here. So David, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks everybody for joining. I hope to present some interesting information on how to prepare your company for an exit, because in our experience, that's one of the best ways to ensure that you get the best price. So I'll talk for 30, 40 minutes or so, and if you can hold your questions till the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. So let's start off. So a little bit about me first. I'm a Canadian. I'm based in Vancouver, BC. I've got training as a professional engineer. I did my MBA at the Harvard Business School, and I've spent my entire career in the high-tech industries, over 35 years so far, working at the C-level with over 70 technology companies in Vancouver and beyond. Currently, I'm a partner in Strategic Exits Corp. We're a boutique investment bank, and our sole focus is to help entrepreneurs like you sell your companies for the most amount of money. So I want to talk about some macro trends that are influencing the market for high-tech company exits right now. We're actually in a very, very good time, probably the best time in history. But on the macro side, the central banks are flooding the economy with cheap money. There's lots of liquidity out there, and I don't need to tell you folks so much of that. You know from the news how much money the Federal Reserve has been pumping into the system to keep the economy growing, coming out of the pandemic and before that the Great Recession. But there's lots of cash out there that needs to find returns, and because there's also very low interest rates to leverage acquisitions, these are macro trends that are working in favor of seeing a lot more company acquisitions take place. Now, if you look at big companies in the corporate side of things, there's no secret that big companies really struggle to innovate because they're captured within the history of what they've been doing for years up to this point. So their ability to innovate is in a very, very narrow channel relating to their current businesses. But they also know that they need to acquire new technologies in order to keep growing, and they're sitting on lots of excess cash like everybody else. So there's a real trend here for corporate strategic partners to try and acquire interesting young technology companies. And at the same time, private equity firms who used to only invest and purchase companies that had achieved some growth path and were getting quite big and profitable. Right now, they're getting much more aggressive in acquiring companies that are at a very early stage of development. In fact, I'm working on one such deal right now as we speak. So the technology trends is that startups, especially virtual ones that don't have any physical head offices where everybody's working online, they are innovating faster and creating new opportunities faster than ever before. I mean, you've seen in the press, you can take a startup and in some cases grow it to unicorn size and sell it within just a couple of years. And 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. But everything's moving a whole lot faster now and will continue to do so. So there's an ever growing supply of technology companies with interesting new technology that can be the target of acquisitions. And it's easier and cheaper for enterprises to acquire them than to try and create new technology. So all of this is leading to a place where now is the prime time for exits, with the macro trends, the corporate trends, the technology trends all moving in the direction towards more and more M&A. And we're seeing lots of growth in M&A, particularly among tech companies and particularly among early stage tech companies. So with the market well set for acquisitions, the next question is well, how do you do it? And there's some common misperceptions out there that I want to dispense with right away, because I'm sure that many of you have heard this, quotes like this, focus on the business, exits are a distraction. I mean, I used to hear that when we were growing companies, several years ago, but that is categorically not true. A value is created by a well-run exit. It's not an accident that's just waiting to happen. It has to be something that's planned and executed just like any other business goal that you have. And just to remind you, maximizing shareholder value is the key company goal. So to the extent that you run a proper exit so that you maximize the price, you're serving all of the shareholders. So don't think that it's just something that's going to walk along and happen. The exit will always present itself at the right time. That's not true either. Waiting is always a risk. That for a number of reasons. One is, as you begin to scale, and you'll find out if you haven't already, scaling a company from small to big is tremendously difficult. All kinds of things can happen as the company grows. There's operational miscues. Everybody makes them, and sometimes they're critical to the company's failure, unfortunately. The business climate can change. I mean, the market for M&A might disappear for all we know, or there could be a change in technology in your particular industry that renders your products obsolete. So it's also the case that an early exit is generally a better exit, which is again contrary to much of what you would hear in the press these days. And it's also the case that if you're waiting for that deal to present itself and it comes along, but at that point you've only got one buyer that you're talking to, so you don't have much negotiating strength. And the longer you wait, of course, the longer your investors are having to wait to get their money back, and so that's reducing the return on investment. So again, exits are not something that happen by accident. They're a planned event, and the earlier you can do it, generally the better it will be for yourself and your shareholders. So, like I say, the exit is a fundamental business process. You need to make the exit part of your strategy right from the very beginning. It's not something you come to towards the end of the life of your company. It's something you begin with on day one. And the exit strategy should drive the entire business strategy. Your goal is to sell your company and return value to your shareholders. So the exit strategy should be always kept in mind when you're looking at new business opportunities. And as I've been saying, a planned exit is far more likely to succeed. But how long does it take? And this is often an interesting topic. Usually it takes between 16 and 18 months to consummate an exit transaction. And that begins at the time that you first engage your mergers and acquisitions professionals until the cash is in the bank. Now, the better that you're prepared for your exit before you start, the shorter time it's going to take. But it will always take longer if your documentation isn't ready, if there's some problem in financial reporting, which often there is with early stage technology companies, or there's some big skeletons hanging around in the closet that could affect your business. All of these things could be problems that need to be dealt with during the exit process. And of course, having to do that means that your exit is going to take longer. But when do you begin? What's the best point in the business cycle? So the ideal exit timing is once you're in rapid growth phase, after you've proven your business model, this is the time to start preparing full tilt for an exit and to engage the investment bankers to start the process. Because if it takes 6 to 18 months to do it, then if you start early enough, you can complete the sale while the growth is still strong. The appetite is strong amongst potential acquirers, and you're going to get the best multiple because your growth rate is more rapid. But what often happens is companies and founders are quite happy growing the business. Everything looks great. It's going to continue on forever. But then something bad happens. The company or the market reaches its peak and it starts to slide down the other side. Effectively, you've ridden it over the top, and the entrepreneurs say, well, we better get going on an exit now while we still can. But unfortunately, at that point, it's often a little too late. So what often happens is that you get an IRR result of 0 because you've blown up the company waiting too long to exit. So please don't make that mistake. Again, the focus is on early exits and starting that process as soon as you possibly can. So how does exit preparation work? Well, you start long before you actually start the exit process. The preparation starts right at the beginning of the founding of the company. And this is important because the better prepared you are, it allows you, the company, to better control the timing by being ready. You're not having to catch up to a proposal that's landed on your desk. You're actually controlling the process by being ready with all of your documentation so that you're in control of when the exit process starts. And by starting early, you can discover holes in the paperwork that you didn't know you had and fix them up. You can identify any showstoppers in your business strategy or execution so you can resolve them before you're starting your exit, all of which means that the better prepared you are, the more controlled you are, that shortens the time to exit, which is in everybody's favor. So the steps in the preparation process. Well, you've got to prepare your due diligence, all of the documentations we've been talking about. You need to set up a virtual data room and to prepare a comprehensive financial model, which includes all of the financial history and projections. These are things that acquirers are going to want to see. You need to create your exit collateral, your confidential information presentation and one-pager, the things that you're going to use to attract potential buyers to your company, and to clean up any lingering issues that might be a problem in your transaction. So as I said, you start this sooner before you get into the exit, and your exit is going to go much more smoothly and hopefully take a lot less time. But there is a challenge with this, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you folks as early stage investors or operators, that at the early stage of development, companies often don't maintain good financial records or any kind of records. And that's very easy to understand because building the business is more important. You know, if you've got 1 hour to spend in the week, you're going to spend it on building the business, not straightening out your paperwork, obviously, because building the business is how you build value. And frankly, for most people, documentation is pretty boring. You know, you'd rather be working on building the company than, filing copies of corporate minutes. But I tell you seriously that if you spend time on that in the beginning, it's going to save you multiples of time during the exit process, because you can't exit without solid documentation. And the buyers, when they do their diligence, are going to be looking intensively for any flaws that exist in your paperwork, just to make sure that they're not overlooking any big problems in your business. So in terms of the documentation, I'd like to describe this as do some now and do some later, because the imperative of continuing to grow the business is always there. It's always number one, and the preparation for an exit is going to fall behind that of necessity. But there are ways that you can keep track of it and keep it up to speed without investing whole amounts of time. So I like to divide the documentation into three categories. Category one is things that you do now. Do it once and you archive it until they exit. You don't have to think about it again. Category two are things that you have to do continuously, but the simpler you can keep the process, the more time you can spend on the business, the less time on the paperwork, which is good. And the category three are documents that you only create at the time that you've launched your exit. And throughout the rest of this presentation, I'll be designating certain types of documentation, either as categories 1, 2, or 3, just to indicate where they happen in the exit process. So as I said, start now, discover the problems, and fill the holes before the exit process starts. So a key item, which is category 1, which you must do right from the very beginning, is intellectual property assignments. And if there is anything that I want you to take away from the presentation today, it is this point. You must get intellectual property assignments from every single person who has ever walked through your company, every employee, consultant, or even the janitor. You have to sign one of these to assign all of the intellectual property rights to the company. And the reason for that is that when a buyer comes along to buy the company, they want to know that they're buying all of the intellectual property. And the only way they can be sure of that is if every single person who has been associated with the company, even contractors, have signed an IP assignment, so that they know that they've got all of the technology developed by all of the people in the company, and it's there to be sold to them. And if you can't prove that, if you can't prove that all of the IP rests with the people who've signed their NDAs, that could be a showstopper for the buyers. And I have seen exits that have cratered at this point because they're not sure that they own all of the technology that they think they're buying. So IP assignments, absolutely critical. The next thing are the financial statements, and this is a category 2. There's some things you have to do pretty much every month to keep it up to date, but you can keep it simple. And that is that if you prepare it on a cash basis to begin, dollars in, dollars out, you record the transactions as they happen without trying to maintain accrued balances for payables or receivables, that type of thing. You can keep it very much simpler and do it all with the junior part-time accountant. And the goal there is just to keep track of the money and the commitments to make sure that you don't run out of money. And you can do it all on QuickBooks or Simply Accounting. Update it monthly, but keep it on a cash basis to keep it simple, so that a junior person working part-time can do it. And now here, at some point, you're going to need to get into a full financial statement review or audit. Typically, a buyer for the company is going to want to see at least a review level engagement. Sometimes they'll want to see an audit as well. And this is category 3, because you really don't need to start the review or audit process until there's an acquirer in place who has indicated that they want them. And the reason why you want to delay your audit as long as possible is as you know, for those that have been through the process, that it is expensive and it's disrupting to the company. So delay it as long as you can. One thing that is becoming very common in the acquisitions business, and I'm seeing it virtually all the time now, is a quality of earnings report. And you may or may not have seen one of these, but essentially it is an analysis of your financial statements looking backwards, but also an analysis of your projections looking forwards to see if they are reasonable given the state of your business and your history to date. And acquirers often look towards this as sort of a third party backup to their estimate of what the company is going to be worth in the future, and therefore how much they're prepared to pay for it today. So in terms of choosing an auditor, you can never go wrong by choosing one of the big 4, KPMG, Deloitte, Pricewaterhouse, or Ernst & Young. But be aware that these are the biggest companies. They're highly reputable. Nobody will ever challenge the results of one of their audits, but you pay the price. They're very, very expensive. And some acquirers will demand that you have a Big Four firm, but more and more, particularly for early stage companies, they don't think the expense and the imprint of a Big Four is really necessary for many acquisitions. Most will accept a second tier firm like BDO Dunwoody, Grant Thornton, and many, many others around the United States and Canada. However, no one is going to accept a local storefront firm that consists of a couple of partners and a secretary. They don't have the credibility that comes with having a professional operation in place. So stick your choices to the one of the Big Four or one of the second tier. Now you can choose your auditor early, so you're ready to go. But as I said, you only need to engage them once there's an acquirer in sight that is going to request an audit. Calculating your adjusted EBITDA. I'm going to assume that as many people with accounting business listening to this, that you know what EBITDA is, the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and to a greater extent now stock-based compensation. And the reason you have to calculate this is that everybody in the M&A business uses adjusted EBITDA as their key performance indicator, even if it's not generally accepted accounting principles, because it is the best representation of the cash flow of the business. It's the one that acquirers use. And you calculate your EBITDA starting with your GAAP statements and doing a bunch of add backs. I won't get into the detail of exactly how that works right now, but suffice to say that it is something that you're going to need to do as a Category 3 very soon after you launch the exit process. Now, to normalize the adjusted EBITDA, the point here is that many founder-operated companies sometimes they slide some of their personal expenses into the company. I mean, heaven forbid that would ever happen. I can tell you it happens 100% of the time. And so part of the process of getting ready for your acquirer to look at your books is to normalize the adjusted EBITDA by taking out all of the personal expenses and any one-off items that are outside the ordinary course of business. Say you had to settle a lawsuit or something and pay a bunch of money. That's a one-time event and it's not going to recur. So you would add that cost back into the EBITDA calculation, so that at the end of the day, what you've got is a statement that reflects the cash flow potential of the business without all the one-offs or the personal expenses, distorting the picture. I mentioned earlier that you will likely need to produce a financial model, and this is Category 3. Again, you'll only start this once the exit is in full tilt, and it requires a significant amount of work. And it's three components of financial records, all integrated to one large and complicated Excel model. You want to have 3 years of annual historicals, and if you can link them to your QuickBooks or other accounting systems so that there's a direct correlation, that saves the audit of that particular part of the model. You want to have 2 years of current monthly budgets and actuals so you can track the progress month to month as the exit is taking place. And you want to have 2 to 3 years of annual projections beyond the end of the budget period, including the normalized calculation of the adjusted EBITDA. So you have the history, the present, and the future all in one model, which makes it much easier for the acquirers to do their due diligence on this. I did mention yes, the quality of earnings report. So I've covered this in some detail. Again, it's the chance for the auditors to profess or to calculate for the company's potential acquirers what the picture of the earnings report would be going forward based on their history and their cash flow to date. So a historical and a future review all in one audit report, which is getting, as I said, more and more common as time goes on. Now we get to the stuff that's not quite as much fun, and that's what I call the corporate janitor work. And this is making sure that all of your paperwork is up to date, ready for due diligence review. So this is in the first part, Category 1, and it relates to making sure that the company is properly constituted, it's filed its registration papers properly, it's domiciled correctly, and very importantly, that all of the shares that have been issued from the company have been issued legally with the appropriate approvals in place. And you really want to pay attention to this because, and I've had to live through this one, unfortunately, that if there is a mistake in the constitution of the company or the issuance of the share certificates, or if you can't find a share certificate, sometimes these mistakes need to be fixed in a court of law, which is at the same time expensive and embarrassing, and it causes delay in the whole exit process because it can take weeks in order to accomplish it. So better to not make those mistakes at the beginning by having your paperwork filed properly when you start the company. Now, finding all of this stuff is, as I said, busy and boring work for the CFO or for the corporate secretary and the company counsel. So to the extent that you can deal with it as a category 1 in the beginning and then file it and forget about it, the better off you're going to be to, to pursue the rest of your exit. Now, there's also a minute book, which is not true for a limited liability corporation. So we'll restrict our view to S corps and C corps. In incorporated companies, and there is categories 1 and 2 documentation that needs to be put into place. You've got to maintain the minute book at your corporate counsel, by your corporate counsel at your registers and records office, so you always know where it is, and more importantly, anybody that wants to file suit knows where to go to register it. It's all part of the process. And in the minute book, it includes a number of sections. It can be quite thick. All of the incorporation documents, which you would do at the first outset, as I mentioned, all of the board meeting minutes, all of the share certificates need to be in there, all of the forms confirming the current directors and officers have agreed to serve. There's a whole list of things that your corporate counsel will need to take care of to make sure that they're in place and ready to go. Now, you got to clean up the minute book to get it ready for an acquisition. And categories 1 and 2, as I've been mentioning all along, need to start long before the exit. When it comes to the minute book at the category 3 stage, there's things that you're looking for specifically, that all the minutes have been signed by the chairman and the secretary. And if they haven't, you have to go and chase them down, even though they may have left the company years ago. A horrible thing to have to do. And of course, if you've kept it up to date all along, you won't need to do that. But generally, anytime you go and do a full tilt audit on your minute book, you're going to find some things that aren't exactly as they should be. And so you need to fix them. And again, fixing them early means you're not delaying the exit. Every share issuance has to be approved by the board. Every financing offer and term sheet that you did previous to this exit, if you raised money from venture capital or from angels, you would have had a term sheet. All of those need to be in there and demonstrated as having been approved by the board. And the reason for all of this is that as part of the exit process, your corporate counsel is going to have to write a legal opinion, on his authority as an officer of and a lawyer, a registered lawyer. He has to write a legal opinion that all of the books are in order, and the other side is relying on that legal opinion as a means of going forward because they trust that the paperwork is in place, because the lawyer has a fiduciary duty to make sure that it is. And if he can't write that report because the paper is still in a mess, then it's a very good chance that your deal is not going to complete because they can't rely on the paperwork. So cleaning up the minute book, very boring, but absolutely essential. The Central Securities Register. This is a register that has records of every share certificate that's ever been issued and canceled, so that you can follow right from the day of the founding of the company, the progress of every share certificate all the way through the system. And currently that's all done by paper, but with the advent of the blockchain, I suspect that we're going to see a lot of this Central Securities Register work move to a blockchain format to make it simple and easy to maintain. So watch for that in the future. Now, one thing that you will need to produce is a share cap table. And what this is a summary of the percentages of shares that are held by all of the shareholders and which class of shares that they hold. Now, for this purpose, I've kept this one really simple and just looked at common shares. And so the first part is that if you look at columns 2 and 3, the issued and outstanding shares. These are the ones that have been issued and approved by the board of directors. And so the share cap table will show everybody who owns a share, adding up to the total number at the bottom, 100% of them. But there's also options and warrants that can be issued, which are abilities to buy shares later. And so they need to be counted in the total quantity of not issued and outstanding, but at least shares that are promised in the future that the investors need to know that they're going to have to be paid out. So there's always the columns here in D and E for the fully diluted share position, which includes all of the warrants and options totaling to 100%. So you will need to prepare one of those, and you can do it at category 3 just as you're starting the exit process. The virtual data room I mentioned right at the top is the place where you store all of the electronic versions of all of the documentation that we've been talking about. So it can be a Dropbox with a set of folders that stores all of the documents in the proper place where they can be found. you want to start putting this data room together before you start the exit process. As you're cleaning up all the paperwork in categories 1 and 2, you're at the same time filing a copy of the material records in the data room so that you know where they are and where the acquirers can find them quickly to get their diligence done. And during an exit process, it can get quite complicated because if you have multiple acquirers vying to buy your business, you're going to need to have a Dropbox for each one of them because they might get different information depending upon the questions that they ask of you. So in the due diligence Dropbox, you're going to have a whole section on human resources, which includes the biographies of the senior management and directors, how to contact them through social media, all of the employment agreements that people are working underneath. They want to see what they're being paid and whether they've got any option and share ownership agreements. You'll need to produce an org chart so they can map where everybody is in the business and relate them to the documents that are in the human resources folder. Likely, you'll need to do security and credit checks on your executives. Never a fun thing, but typically something that acquirers want to have. And of course, if there's severance obligations in your employment agreements, then that's a potential liability. So the acquirers are going to want to know all about that too. So you can start to see that there's an immense amount of documentation that's required in getting ready for an exit. It's like I said, it's not a simple process where somebody shows up and says, "I love your company, I'm going to buy you tomorrow." It's really not like that. There's an awful lot of work that goes into this. And to the extent that you do this better, it shortens the exit process and it probably drives up the value of the company because you've demonstrated how well organized you are, which is very reassuring to an acquirer coming in to buy your company. Non-disclosure agreements. So we've mentioned, intellectual property assignments. The non-disclosures are the cousins to these. These are ones that when you sign this agreement, you're agreeing not to tell any of the secrets that you've learned inside the company. And so it's important that every individual and potential business partner or company that you've done business with, anybody who's looked at the technology and the IP or discussed any competitive aspects of your business, you need to have them under an NDA so that you know that the corporate secrets aren't going to leak out. The acquirers are going to be insistent on seeing a full set of NDAs so that they can be sure that nobody else has got control or knowledge of the importance. So financing documents, and we've talked a little bit about this. So there's all the previous term sheets for your financings that have been approved by the board. They need to be in the due diligence finder in the Dropbox. All the share subscription agreements. So everybody who's bought shares in the company will have a share subscription agreement. They all need to be in the Dropbox. If you borrowed money, the lender agreements need to be there. Any presentations you made to try and raise money, the latest version of that finance presentation needs to be in the Dropbox, and any final versions of any executive summary, one-page documents, your corporate confidential information memorandum, any of the documentation or collateral that you produced to help the exit process, all of that needs to be in the due diligence folder in the right place. Product roadmap, something that you may not want to share until the end of the process because these really are the company corporate jewels. But investors need to know what your product roadmap is, what enhancements you've made to your technology in the past, and what your plans are for enhancements in the future, because this is where a lot of value is created, and this is what the acquirer is really paying for. You probably want to have technical descriptions of how your hardware or your software works, so that it makes it easier for them to do their due diligence of looking at the code to ensure that it's up to coding standards, and to see if there's any open source document or open source software that you've used in creating your software. They need to know all of these things. So technical descriptions of how the products work make it much easier for them to do their due diligence. And also it gives you a chance to display the competitive advantages that your technology has over your competition, which is something else that the acquirers are going to want to understand deeply. We've talked a little bit about intellectual property. So in the Dropbox goes a list of all of the patents, if you have any, that's been awarded, and a discussion of what they cover, why they're valuable to your company, any trademarks or trade secrets, any patents that you have in prosecution that haven't been awarded yet. They want to know all about those. And to the extent that you can, and this is not always done, but because it's so expensive and time consuming, but an analysis by a third party of what your patents do for you and what aspects of your business that they protect. It essentially tells you what the value of your patents is, which again relates to the value of your company. So it's often something that is done as part of the process of demonstrating the worth of the company. Material contracts. So copies of all of the contracts that are significant documents of the company and that they may be more important than the day-to-day purchase orders. Things like distributor and reseller agreements that cover how your products are marketed around the world. Any development agreements you have with third parties to help develop your technology, that's obviously important. The leases, to the extent that you have bricks and mortar that you're paying for. And again, I note that virtual companies that don't have any bricks and mortar are becoming more and more common. And so you're seeing fewer leases actually in the diligence files. And any obligations to spend money that haven't been otherwise listed in your financial statements. And here I'm thinking particularly that if you're in an intellectual property pursuit, if you've got patents that are in process, the cost of fighting these and going through the prosecution process, all of this costs huge amounts of money, which isn't in your balance sheet, but it's nonetheless money that you're going to have to spend down the road. Your acquirers need to know about that. The sales funnel, I'm sure you've seen these. This is a list of all of the potential customers that are in your pipeline that haven't quite sold yet. It could be a history of what they've ordered over a period of time, what products that they've ordered, where they are in the sales pipeline and the probability of close and the expected close date, because this all helps to reconcile against your sales projections to make sure that if you're projecting a huge growth in sales, that you actually have the sales in the pipeline to to get there. So these are things that the acquirer are going to look at in some great depth. Your customer list, again, as a reconciliation point, what have they purchased in the past, their average order size, any major contracts that you sailed. These are all things about your business that acquirer is going to want to know. But they are, of course, among the last documents you want to disclose because your customer list is one of your principal your principal documents that are your corporate secrets. So you won't want to be disclosing them till you're very, very sure that this transaction to sell the company is going to go ahead. Next, marketing material. These are things that you can start at category 1, but keep up to date during category 2. All of your product brochures, becoming more and more important today. The analytics of your website traffic from Google and the Google console. There's all kinds of SEO reporting tools out there that you're using to analyze your website traffic, because this is becoming more and more an article of defining how valuable the company is by how large their footprint is on the social media. So very important to have a history of that, those statistics available. Copies of any white papers you've written on the state of the market, which again burnishes your credentials as knowing something about the market that you're in. So again, building credibility and increasing the value of the company. Any external estimates of the market size, like from Gartner or Forrester, these are all good things to have in your database because it helps the acquirer understand your business and how valuable it is. Financial obligations. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Leases, which you're going to have to probably at least 5 years into the future, you've got a financial obligation to spend that money. The money you need to spend on your filing your patents and prosecuting them through the expensive process of getting them approved by the patent offices. Any insurance policies that you have on your business, you may or may not have directors and officers or errors and omissions insurance, but to the extent that you do, this is an important protection for the company. And again, things that acquirers want to know. The documents that you need to produce as you're selling the company. And it used to be years ago that any acquirer would want to see a big, thick, 50-page business plan with all kinds of analysis of the market and projections and that type of thing. We've not seen a demand for a business plan in quite some time now. The whole process of doing diligence on companies is happening much, much faster. And so many acquirers are quite content to see a confidential information memorandum, which you would prepare as you start the exit process. And it could be as short as 10 pages. And it's often produced by your exit advisor, people like me at Strategic Exits Partners. And it is the key marketing document for the company because it summarizes the business in a small number of pages to indicate why it is different, why it is better, and why it's valuable to the acquirer. And it includes the graphs that you produce from the financial model. So, in a 10-page document, you could basically describe most of the business and determine whether an acquirer is going to be interested in moving forward into the diligence phase. But it gets even better than that because oftentimes we're not even asked for a CIM, a confidential information presentation, or a SIP, which is essentially a slide deck, a PowerPoint presentation of your of your sim is often good enough to get the conversation started, and they're prepared to move into diligence based on what they learn in a 10-page PowerPoint presentation. So it's the process is becoming in some respects much easier on management, because those used to take months to prepare. I know, because I used to have to create them, and now you can do them in a matter of a couple of days, and the acquirers can review them very, very quickly. So, and even simpler than the presentation is the one pager, where you do a point form summary of the CIM all on one page, and it's in point form, and it has various sections to show the products, the competitive advantages, all in note form, nothing in sentence style, because you've got a lot of information to put on a single page, but you can contain the financial graphs, a list of the patents, very short biographic summaries of the founders. And with that, this is a single document that you can prepare and send out to potential acquirers, and they can decide within a few minutes that this is something that they're interested in. So again, cuts down their time, cuts down your time, gets the deal done, or a point where you can get to the deal done much more quickly. So in summary, with respect to preparing for an exit, remember that right now the markets are very hot. There's a convergence of trends in the macro space, and with large companies and with small companies and the rate that they're developing. So this is a wonderful time to be thinking about selling your company. The markets are extremely hot, but the caution here is that they can also cool very, very quickly. You may remember this pandemic that happened in March of a year ago, about 18 months ago. In the space of 3 days, the M&A market seized up tight, and deals just stopped for about 3 weeks until the market started to improve. The influx of money started to get things happening. People started crawling out from behind their closed doors, and business started to return to normal, and the heated M&A market returned. But the important point is that it stopped for a period of time, and at that point, nobody knew if another deal was going to be done or at what time in the future. Happily, the liquidity has kept the market moving, and hopefully it will continue. But again, any disruption can cause it to cool very, very quickly, and so you don't want to assume that these hot markets are going to last forever. The other important point about an exit preparation is that it's a part of your business process. It's essential. It's not something that happens by accident, and there's an awful lot of work to do. Some in advance of the exit process, category 1, some that's done continuously, and then, as we talked about, some that we do at the formal launch of the process. And here's the important point, and a bit of a jingle for the investment bankers in the world, is that an experienced investment banker or exit advisor can do a lot of this prep work while you run the business. And this is very important, because oftentimes we've seen that the founder of the company is trying to build the company at the same time as selling it, which is way too much work. And then typically what happens is that the founder fails at both aspects. The company suffers, and the exit usually craters. So it's far better to have some professionals come in and help you run the exit process, so that you can maintain your efforts on managing and growing the business, which is ultimately what's creating value for the acquirer. So with that, Josh, I'll stop the formal part of the presentation and open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. And
should I stop sharing my screen, or?
Yeah, I guess you can stop sharing your screen. A couple questions that we got here, and the first one, someone asked, you said it takes about 6 to 18 months to get through the process of this. Mm-hmm. Why does it take so long? I think you answered that question just going through your presentation. But to dig into further than that, like, what do you think is the most time outside of, like, obviously it's a long process, it's a lot to put together. Where would you say the most effort goes in terms of those different categories and pieces? Like, what should founders expect to take the longest of the process and be the most difficult?
Well, without trying to be trite about it, it's the mistakes that are on the seller side. Right. We're working on the middle of a deal right now, and I've got some experienced counsel working with me, and I've told them that this particular transaction we're going to get done before Christmas, which is in 60 days or less. And he looked at me and kind of chuckled and said, he says, that's never going to happen. It's going to take you at least 90, if not 120 days. And the problem is, he says, 9 times out of 10, the delays happen because the seller isn't ready. They don't have their documentation done, right, or there is a problem that's discovered that has to be dealt with. And these are the things that delay things out. And, also, by the way, it drives up your legal bills because your lawyers are having to spend more time on this.
Right.
to close, and I didn't mention this, and I probably should have, that it can cost, several $100,000 to process a transaction, even for a small company. And the bigger the company or the more time you have to spend on it, that's all lawyers' time, and they're paid by the meter, and they're just clicking over at $700, $800 an hour to get
Sure.
this done. So it's hugely expensive. So this is why I keep coming back to emphasize: the sooner that you start the process, the sooner you find if you've got any problems in your paperwork, you can fix them then before you get into the exit process, so that the exit runs a lot more smoothly. So the big mistake is not being ready. Absolutely.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Someone just asked, are we sending out a recording of this? Yes, we will definitely do that. That will come in the next couple of days.
You mean they haven't been able to take notes of all of this as we've been talking? There's an awful lot here.
I'm probably gonna have to re-watch this one a few times. A couple more questions we got here. Another one on the finance documentation, financials, and then like your previous rounds before this, your cap table. Are there any tools or softwares that you recommend tracking a lot of that stuff in terms of cap table and finances? Is there a common stack people use? Is it coming from all different places and you're piecing it together in a document? What's the typical best practice there?
Well, that's a good question. I suspect, but I don't know, that there must be off-the-shelf packages to help you manage your share cap table. But I will tell you that in my decades of experience, I've always done it myself, starting with a clean sheet of Excel and just built it up from there. Because there's always little funny things like so-and-so has been granted options, and you got to make a note of that. And I don't know how well the standard off-the-shelf software deals with this kind of thing. And for those, you're on the accounting side of the business, so I probably don't need to tell you how challenging it is to keep up to date the stock-based compensation records. Because every time you issue an option, and it vests over a particular period of time, and then it expires at a particular period of time. Each option agreement requires 60 months worth of columns in it to keep track of the ongoing vesting of this. Now, I don't know if there are models that actually handle this. When I was doing it full time, there sure weren't, and I had to have the very complex tables. But it helped me, because when the auditors showed up, I just handed it to them. They were able to cross-reference that everything was in shape. You could also cross-reference it to your central securities register that I talked about, where you list every single share that's been issued. You can put all of this into one comprehensive document that verifies that all the shares have been issued properly, they're numbered properly, they're all accounted for, and you get the summaries like I put up on the screen of how many of each class of shares are owned by who, and so it tells you everything you need to know in a single document. That's very, very helpful, and I don't know if you can get that off the shelf.
Yeah, I think again, I come less from the accounting side. I'm a founder, more on the strategic and growth side, but most of our companies are using either Excel, like you said, because it's so nuanced. There have been so many not common scenarios that have occurred on the cap table, or Carta is a popular one for anyone out there who's looking for a software. CARTA is probably the most common software we use for managing cap tables for our clients.
I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, it's good software, and they're doing a really good job. And then one more question we got, and then we can wrap things up here. Just a general question someone asked, other than the planning and the prep work for, your exit, what is the biggest mistake founders make when going through the process of planning for their exits, or going through the process of an acquisition? What is the biggest mistake, other than obviously not planning is a mistake as well?
Yeah. In order to keep within the timeframes here, I cut out probably a third of the slides that I would normally include in this presentation. And one of the ones I deleted was the slide called alignment amongst the founders. And this can be a huge mistake, is that, different founders or investors, if you've got angel investments in the companies, and particularly if you have venture capital investors in the company, all of them may have a different view as to when and for how much the company should be sold and to whom. And if you don't have perfect alignment amongst all of your founders and stakeholders, the people that can influence the exit, most assuredly it will fail. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was running my last company, and I hired on as my exit advisor, who is someone who is now my partner in strategic exits, a fellow with deep experience, Basil Peters. I hired him on because I understood that, from talking to the board of directors and the chairman, that they all understood that our plan was to do an early exit, develop the technology, get a couple of landmark sales to prove that it was economically viable, and then try to sell it through a distributor, because it's easier to sell, a nascent company to someone who's got a broad-based network of distribution than try to recreate it yourself. I mean, right. That's a scenario for disaster. And but it became clear as we developed the business through the next several months that there was some lingering suspicion here. And eventually I had it out with the chairman. I said, I get the sense that you're not on side with this early exit. He says, no, I'm absolutely not. I think it's a stupid idea. Oops. And so at that point, the exit stopped in mid-track, and I had to phone up my my friend and colleague and exit advisor and tell him that I had to fire him because I didn't have alignment. Now, luckily, I knew that alignment was important, and so I sought it fairly early on. But there have been cases where a company has gone, major ways into the process, only to discover that there's some lingering doubts about the whole exit process. And every time that has created the exit, a great deal of loss of time and momentum to everybody. So that's a huge mistake that you have to, and most people don't even think about it, right? They think everybody's on side. They're not on side, not until you actually have an agreement down on paper and signed. Then you have an assignment, because everybody could be hedging their bets and not wanting to be seen to be offside. But boy, you must get that right at the very beginning.
Yeah, I think that translates to everything in a startup with your founders too. Not to take us off topic here, but past experience with my companies and different sets of founders I've worked with. Get it in writing, have an agreement, agree on paper. Don't just give people your word.
And check back at least every 6 months to make sure that nothing's happened in the business or personal lives that would have changed their opinion. So
right.
Constant check-in. Again, they will not beat a path to your door to buy your company. It's a hard job to get it ready for exit.
Right. I think we're almost at time here. That's all we had in terms of questions. David, thank you again. We really, really appreciate it. This was great. And again, to everyone listening, we're going to send out a recording of this along with David's information and Strategic Exits, their information, in a follow-up email shortly. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Graphite or David. David, again, is happy to chat with any of you guys about your companies, startups you're working on, your preparations for exits or planning. And then on the accounting finance side, always happy to have a conversation. All that being said, again, thank you, everyone. Looking forward to the next event we have here. And Karen Deep, if there's not anything else, I think we're good to go here.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for attending. I hope it's been valuable to you.
Cool. Thanks, David.
No, Josh, I think we're all good.
Okay.
Well said. Thank you so much, David. It was a great session. Thanks a lot.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you. Been a pleasure as well. Thank you, Josh.
Bye, everyone.
In the meantime, thank you, everyone, whoever joined us for today's session. I hope this was as informational for you and as fun for you as much it was for us to bring it to you. So thanks a lot for today. And we hope to see you at the next event as well.